Hello, everyone. You are watching the Asian American Herald, a new media network. This show is being aired via live stream on Facebook, and a recording will be available afterwards at our Facebook page, Asian American Herald. My name is Himani Gupta Carlson, and I'm a professor at Empire State College in Saratoga Springs, New York, as well as a community-based farmer and writer. So I want to open our show tonight first by offering respect to the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. The Haudenosaunee is a confederacy of 6 nations, including the Mohawk, who are the original caretakers of the land where I reside. I thank them for offering me shelter in their territories for the past decade, and I acknowledge my status here as a settler. So on our show tonight, we will be discussing voting. How to do it, where to do it, and when. We are happy that so many of our viewers and listeners are first-time voters in this presidential election. And at the same time, we recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has made voting in this year's election quite different. So to help clarify the procedures, we will be speaking tonight with John Conklin of the New York State Board of Elections, as well as Phil Barrett, supervisor for the Town of Clifton Park. So John and Phil, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out. I know you're both very busy. So John, I want to start with you. Many of our followers are Asian Americans, and in that group, quite a few are recent immigrants and or first-time voters. So they might be seeing or hearing a lot of terms in the mainstream press that are unfamiliar to them. So I was wondering if you could just start by helping to define the terms. What is an absentee ballot? What is early voting? What is in-person voting? And what is vote by mail?
Okay, so let me go back to historically for decades in New York State and in most places in the United States, voting took place on one day, Election Day, which was usually the first Tuesday in November. So in New York State, on Election Day, the polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's a very long day. Gives people the opportunity, as many people to vote as possible. And that's the way it was for 100 years plus. I think we're operating under the 1939 Constitution, but there were other constitutions, but we always kept Election Day on the one day, and it has to coordinate nationally with all the other election days in all the other states as well for a federal election like president. So a few years ago, some states started implementing what they call early voting, which was, in addition to Election Day, we'll have a couple of days where if you can't make it to the polls on Election Day, you could have another opportunity to vote, and it will be early. So it got the name early voting. Early voting is just another version of in-person voting. You go to a poll site designated for early voting. It's the same procedure as on Election Day. You go in, you sign a poll book with your signature. That's how they verify your identity. You're handed a paper ballot in New York State. You go into a privacy booth, you mark the paper ballot how you want. You can vote for anybody that you want during a general election. You're not restricted by your party or any enrollment or anything like that. So you mark your ballot, you take it over to the scanner, you slide it into the scanner. It doesn't matter how you put it in, whether it's face up or face down or front ways or back ways, the scanner will read it no matter how you put it in. And once you put it in the scanner and the scanner sort of ticks it off as another vote, then you know that you're done. So that's the procedure, whether you vote on Election Day or whether you vote early voting in person. Those are all the in-person versions. So back when you used to do, when we had elections all on one day, many people couldn't be at home on Election Day. They might be traveling, they might be on business, they might be fighting in a war overseas. So they developed an absentee ballot because you were absent from your county on Election Day. So that was primarily the main reason why you got an absentee ballot. It's a paper ballot. You apply for it. Usually it's mailed to you, but you can pick it up in person. You fill it out the same way you fill out the paper ballot in the poll site. You mark the circles next to your choices, but then you fold it up. You put it in what's called an affirmation or security envelope. And that envelope may have some information about you as the voter on the outside of it. It may have a barcode on it. You fold up your ballot, you put it in that affirmation envelope, and you sign it with your signature, and you date it. And again, that's the primary means of verifying your identity, is the signature match, either in the poll book on election day or back at the Board of Elections when they look at your absentee ballot. So once you've put it in the security envelope, then it goes inside another envelope called the return envelope. And on the outside of the return envelope will have the address of your county board of elections, and that's where you send your absentee ballot to. So when they get it, they look at it, they will open the return envelope now, because they have to review the absentee ballot to make sure that there aren't any curable defects with it. Did you forget to sign it? Did someone else sign it? Did a witness sign it? Is there a witness but no signature? There's a number of ways that you can make a mistake with your ballot, but it can be cured. So the board needs to review that immediately to determine if there's a curable defect, and then they will send a notice to you saying there was a mistake with your ballot. Please make this affirmation and we'll cure it, and then your ballot will be counted. Now, so just to talk a little bit more procedure, on election day, at the end of the day, all the votes that are voted on the machines with the paper ballots are counted and tabulated that night and announced that night. We also tabulate all of the early voting votes on that night, and they're announced that night. But absentee ballots are not canvassed the day of the election. They're canvassed after election day, pursuant to a procedure in the statute. The local board has to send a notice to all the local candidates and the party leaders saying, we're going to be opening and counting absentee ballots on this day, at this time, in this place. So the candidates have the right to send observers to watch the procedure, and they may make objections to the process. So that usually happens sometimes at maybe 8 to 10 days after the election, because for absentee ballots, you have to postmark them by election day, but then they have 7 days to come back to the board and still be counted for what we call domestic absentees. If you have family members who are overseas or maybe in the military, they also have absentee ballots, and there are special federal provisions that allow them to come back to the board up to 13 days after the election. Okay. So the board could start counting some absentee ballots, but they cannot finish until that 13th day, when all the military and overseas ballots have had an opportunity to come back.
Okay, just a quick question in there. I'm a history professor, and that historical perspective was really interesting for me and really helpful. But if you mail in an absentee ballot, let's say it arrives 2 weeks before the election, it can't be counted because it's absentee. It has to be in the pile of absentee ballots, or can it be counted as an early voting ballot?
No, it's strictly counted in the absentee ballots, because it either comes back by mail or is hand delivered back to the board.
And so tell us now about what's changed this year, because it seems like, there's a lot of different things going on.
Well, this is the first year that New York State has had early voting in a presidential election. So we started it last fall in 2019. So it was in place for the general last year, and then it was in place for the primary in June. But this is the first, what I would call, major election where we've had early voting. So as of yesterday, we had 1.3 million people statewide who had voted early voting. Last year, we had 256,000 for the entire 9 days of early voting statewide. Already, we've had 1.3 million statewide. So we're smashing records every single day. Now, the numbers were low last year. It was a low turnout election. There weren't any statewide candidates. There weren't any federal candidates on the ballot. It's what we commonly call a local year. So you might have had a local mayor or a supervisor or town board members or things like that. So it's a typically lower turnout election. In fact, it's the lowest turnout election of the 4-year cycle. But the presidential election is the highest turnout election of the 4-year cycle. So we're seeing for the first time what happens when you have a major turnout. And early voting is not designed to be a regular election day. We only have 287 early voting sites around the state, whereas normally on election day, you'd have over 5,200 sites around the state. So you're kind of trying to take 50 pounds and push it through a 5-pound bag. It doesn't, that's why you're seeing lines, and it takes a while for people to vote. Now, we've devoted as many resources as we can to it, and try to mitigate that, but it's not designed to handle that kind of stress for early voting. It's designed to be a supplement to election day, not a substitution for election day.
Yeah. And I guess the pandemic has really made it kind of a preferred alternative for a lot of people.
There's no question. I think a lot of people are early voting with the idea that the crowds will be bigger on election day, and they probably will be. But the pandemic is also having that consequence that an early voting poll site should be running at 50% of capacity. So you can't just throw more people in a room. The machines have to be further apart. The poll workers have to be further apart. They have to wear their PPE. They have to wipe down the equipment periodically. They have to observe social distancing within the poll site. People have to observe social distancing on the line. They have to wear masks. Now, just to be clear on that mask point, we ask voters to bring a mask with them and to wear it. If they can't wear a mask for, say, like a medical reason, or if they just decline for whatever reason they want, no one's going to be denied the right to vote over a mask. They will be brought into the poll site. They'll be isolated within the poll site. A ballot will be brought to them. They'll have the opportunity to vote. The right to vote is the right that guarantees all rights. So no one is going to be denied the right to vote over a mask.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting too. It's a lot of work on the precinct workers.
Most definitely. They have a lot to do. They have a lot of rules to obey, a lot of rules to follow, and it's difficult in trying circumstances. From what I've seen so far, for the most part, the voters are enthusiastic. Excuse me. They're reasonable. They're, pleasant. There isn't a lot of, disgruntled complaints that I'm hearing, other than, yes, I'm on a long line and I want to vote quicker. So that has been most of it. And as long as everybody's reasonable, they keep a polite disposition. Usually we try to get them in and out as quick as possible. And it has been working that way.
Okay. So I'm curious, because of the surge in early voting, as well as probably a little bit of an increase in absentee balloting, I don't know, or maybe you don't know yet, what kind of steps are being taken to ensure that people only vote once, that they don't play that vote early, vote often kind of joke of the past?
Yes, some places like historically Chicago or, in New York City, where they had Tammany Hall. Yes, you would hear things like that over the years, historically. There's a couple of things in place for early voting. Most local boards have in place electronic poll books. So as soon as you vote somewhere in person, it's recorded everywhere in the county. So you can't go to the first early voting site and then go to another early voting site and vote again. You won't be allowed. The poll book will say this voter's already voted, or it will show a signature already in the box indicating a voter has already voted. Absentee voting is a little bit different. Excuse me. A lot of talking today. You can change your mind with an absentee ballot and request another one. Sometimes people make mistakes and they spoil them. They can get another one. Even if you vote an absentee ballot and you send it in, you can go vote in person after that if you want, because the statute requires that anytime an absentee ballot is canvassed, the poll book has to be checked to make sure that the voter didn't come in person and vote. And if they did, then the absentee ballot is set aside and not counted. So that's the way that we ensure only one vote for an individual is counted.
Okay, so I just keep thinking about my polling place, which is a fire station in Greenfield Center. And I usually see like what looks like a very almost ancient book that has my signature in it. And I go and sign on my signature. How are they going to know that I have not voted early. I'm actually going to vote on election day. I like voting on election day, especially during presidential elections. But how are they going to know at my own polling place that I haven't been elsewhere when they're doing this kind of manually, unless that's changed?
Well, the early voting procedures will update the poll book that they have on election day. So if you voted at any point during early voting, it will be reflected in that election day paper poll book.
Okay, that's reassuring to know. I'd like to actually now turn to both of you, Phil and John, and just ask you kind of a little bit about your thought on this particular election procedurally, not sort of about the outcome in terms of who's going to be elected and all that. You've both had, pretty long careers in public service, and you've both experienced many elections, as a as a state official and as an elected official. And so I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts about the different voting procedures, the new safety protocols, and kind of the get out the vote efforts that have really occurred in this election? I'm wondering if you see these changes affecting voter participation into the future. Like, is this going to be the election that really energizes the electorate?
You want to go ahead first, Phil?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it really depends on the issues and the candidates more than it depends on the procedures that are in place. You could have voting for 2 months, and if people aren't energized by or interested in the election, what the turnout will be, who knows? But probably lower than what we're seeing now. In this particular year, we have a very polarizing election. We have two candidates that are completely different across the board, and so that would generally give each candidate the opportunity to energize their base, and that's what's happened. So when you have a energized base on the left and an energized base on the right, it certainly makes sense that we're seeing a very high turnout, an early turnout. I think John made a great point. Early voting is meant to be supplemental to election day, not a substitute. But many people are so eager to vote on either side that they'll wait in line. They'll wait in the rain. We've had a lot of wet weather recently this week, but they're waiting in the rain. They want to get in there to vote. I impress upon folks that there's still plenty of time to vote. You still have days to vote. I've talked to, we have commissioners in Saratoga County, like in Albany, and every county where there's one Democrat, one Republican commissioner. One thing I'd like to see happen is, on Saturday and Sunday, the voting time is expanded due to the turnout, even though that kind of goes against what John correctly said about it being a supplement. Well, people are going out to vote. Let's do what we can to accommodate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. But I think it'll still be a strong turnout on election day. But election day is a lot different. Right now, we have 3 polling places in the county that are open.
Mm-hmm.
Election day, you're going to have a whole bunch. Yeah. And, there's going to be a polling place very close to your home that you've visited in the past. So if the lines are long, maybe waiting till election day is a better option.
Yeah, who knows? What are your thoughts, John, about kind of this for the long, kind of this kind of election and the turnout, energizing the electorate for the future?
Well, I certainly agree with what Supervisor Barrett just said in terms of one of the virtues of early voting is if you can't wait in the line today, you can always come back tomorrow and maybe the next day. And I mean, you can keep doing that until November 3rd. That's the last day. So, but then the options really open up on November 3rd. So instead of having 3 options, you may have 40 options, or not. There'll be 40 sites open in your county And so, all the voters will go to their assigned site instead of congregating at one early voting site and maybe overwhelming it.
Yeah.
I agree with him. I think candidates are really what energize an electorate, not necessarily procedures. And I think you do absolutely see two candidates that are, polar opposites, markedly different from each other, and they do seem to be energizing their base, at least in New York State. So I don't know. I mean, I think the pandemic COVID protocols are certainly affecting this election. The administration of it is absolutely been affected by that. But I hope it's of limited duration. Obviously, we don't want to be in this forever, and I don't want to be implementing these COVID procedures as an election administrator much beyond this year, hopefully. The machines in New York State are relatively new. We've been voting on optical scanners with paper ballots for about 10 or 11 years here. The procedures that are in place there are very good. The machines themselves are safe and secure. They're never connected to the internet. They're in the hands of bipartisan teams wherever they are. Every county runs the elections, so there's 62 separate warehouses. Anything where there might be someone nefarious, they'd have to do it in 62 separate places and affecting thousands upon thousands of voting machines. That would be extremely, extremely difficult. It would not be something you could do, over the internet or anything like that. So I think the protocols that we put in place for the pandemic seem to be working. Remember, this is not the first election we're having in the pandemic in New York. We had a primary, and a lot of people came out. We had about 3 million people that came out and voted in the primary. We did not see a spike in COVID cases or anything in June as a result of the election. Voters, again, were very tolerant of those procedures, and I think they're doing that for the general election as well. So I think the protocols in place with regard to the pandemic are good, and they are working. The regular protocols we have in place for voting that have been in place for a long time also continue to work. You said, Hamani, a minute ago about you're not sure what the number of absentee ballots is. Well, 2.5 million people have applied for absentee ballots in New York State as of Tuesday. That's the last day we have complete numbers for. That is an astronomical amount of absentee ballots. Typically, historically in New York State, the electorate that votes by absentee ballot is like 4, 5, 6% of the electorate, not 50%. So that's a complete sea change from our previous experience, and the system is not built for that. In the primary, when we had, I think it was 960,000 absentee ballots, which was approximately 50% of what the turnout was at that point. You saw that it took weeks to count all those absentee ballots, because to canvass a single absentee ballot is a multi-step, laborious, tedious process. You have to send out the notices. You have to have everybody assemble at the right time. Everybody gets to look at, the signature and the date, and is it sealed properly? And then when the ballot's open, did they make any marks on the ballot? Did they do anything that would identify the voter? Is there an overvote? Is there an undervote? And all the canvassing procedures while people are watching this and objecting to it. So now we've added a multi-step cure process on top of that. So it takes time to do an absentee ballot. So that's why you saw it took 6 to 7 weeks after the primary before we knew all the results. There were many congressional races where we didn't know who the winner was until the end of July, the beginning of August. We had time because the general election is not until November, but, a lot of people didn't like that. I will, invoke the media here because they want to know who won right away. Yeah. They can't stand waiting, and they describe that as a delay, and it's like, well, okay, it's a delay, but it's driven by state law. We're following state law, so it takes as long as it takes, and it took a long time. We're going to have a similar situation after the general election. Now, there are some hard deadlines after the election in play that we didn't have in the primary. You have to have your state results certified and to the Electoral College by December 7th.
Wow.
Because they're going to meet on December 14th. That's a lot less than 6 to 8 weeks of
Yeah.
counting. You're not going to have that much time. So, in fact, state law requires that the local boards of elections have to have their general election results certified by November 28th.
Okay.
I think, what's realistically going to happen is somewhere between the 28th and December 7th. That's when we'll get most of our results. I don't know that everybody will have it done by the 28th, but the Electoral College is not going to move, so we have to have everything done with a hard deadline by the 7th.
Wow. That's going to be very interesting to see. So Phil, you had talked about issues driving energizing issues and candidates energizing the electorate, not procedures. And over the past several months, we have seen increased media coverage of local demonstrations. We've also seen a lot of concern from various constituent groups, parents, business owners, healthcare workers, educators, about the impacts of COVID-19. And I'm curious how these concerns might manifest themselves, express themselves at the polls. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I guess it depends on where you think our individual communities and the country should be right now with regard to the COVID pandemic. Obviously, there's very big differences on reopening or not, and the candidates are talking much differently about whether the society should be more open, or perhaps we should take a more measured approach. So you see that's one of those issues that is completely different in each camp, right? So it really comes down to what you feel personally. And we have all been affected by COVID in one way or another. Sadly, how many people have lost jobs, lost income? They've had their routines completely uprooted, and it has affected people of every age. We have a senior center here with over 1,500 members, and they rely on a routine, programs, activities, a place to socialize. That went away overnight. That was a real tough hit for a lot of our seniors. You look at what our kids have gone through, with school being completely different, lack of socialization, lack of activities that they would normally engage in, both at school and privately, and even being able to see family members. And then, like I said, so many of our neighbors have been affected financially. So it comes down to your individual experience and where you personally believe society should be moving toward. Should we be more open, or should we be taking a more measured approach? And that might be one of the deciding issues in this election.
Yeah, in terms of which candidate to choose at the top of the ballot and all the way down.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And again, it goes back to your personal preference, just like any campaign issue turns out to be. It all comes down to your personal preference, what you believe in, and what the candidate is talking about and displaying as part of their campaigning in this instance. We see one candidate with multiple rallies a day with tens of thousands of people a rally. And then we see another candidate that's taking a much different approach with their campaign. So just with the campaign mechanics and how they're being seen in public every day is night and day, right? So it's completely different. Just without them saying a word, it's completely different. So you look at how one candidate is going about their day, and that might be something that you say, yes, that's the direction we should be going in. That's where I want to see society be at this point, or at least moving toward. Or you could be looking at the other candidate and saying something different. So just the overall way that they're campaigning says a lot about where they stand on the issues. And I think that's going to go back to being a huge decider in this election.
Yeah. Wow. That is true, and we will see what happens. So, John, where will you be on election night?
I'll be right in this chair in my office here in Albany. Election night, we have to produce election night results. So our website, I'm sure, will be heavily monitored. But remember, I don't know what percentage of the electorate is going to be voting in person, and those are the only votes that we're going to show on election night. So if 30%, 40%, 50% of the electorate ends up voting on an absentee ballot, we won't know those results for several weeks after the election. So, you may attempt to call New York State at your own peril.
Yeah. That'll be really interesting. I am such an election night junkie that it's going to be sad not to know the results right away.
And I think many states will be in that same position.
Yeah, most likely. And those toss-up states that'll be very nail gripping for several weeks, I think. So, Phil, where will you be on election night?
I'll be home,
Yeah.
and I'm not an election commissioner like John, so I don't have the types of responsibilities that he has on election night. But and I'm not up for re-election this year. I have run 11 times, so I know what election nights are all about. But no, I'll be home. I think for a lot of people, John mentioned about waiting and how people don't like to wait, and that's for sure. And I think people will probably need to apply some patience with regard to this election, because it's not certain, but I think the chances are better this year than any year that I can remember in my lifetime that we may not know who won the election the night of the election on election day. I know last year, a lot of people stayed up till, the wee hours of the morning, waiting to see who won. And a winner was declared at that time, but I think in this situation, if you wait up to the wee hours, you might be doing it without a final result, which I know will be frustrating for some people. As we just talked about, you see the energy, the Republican base, the Democrat base, both very energized. People are out there standing in the rain. They want to vote. They want to vote early. They will want to know who won the election on election day. They probably won't know. Hopefully it won't be too far past election day that we have a final tally and results that we can rely on. But we've seen in the past, the exit polls are not as reliable as we might want them to be. So we really can't put a lot of stock into those. It's just going to come down to counting every vote, and that's very important. And that is ultimately when we're going to know. So I just hope it's not too long after election day, because I think that would undermine some of the trust that people might have in the election process. Even if nothing nefarious was occurring, I think people would, tend to get frustrated. So, I just been reminding people that I've been talking to, please understand that this year is probably going to be much different than any year that we can remember. It already has been. I mean, there's never been early voting lines at the Clifton Park Library. There's never been people waiting in the rain to vote early at the Clifton Park Library. But hopefully, like I said, we can get those hours expanded this weekend, because I think that would be a good move by our county to make that happen. It's not easy, as I'm sure John can attest. It's not like snapping your fingers and suddenly you can keep the polls open a little longer. But I do think it's something, that we can do. This has to be, of all times, through 2020 in this COVID situation, and God knows hindsight's 2020, and there's a lot of hindsight in 2020, but we have to continue to be a can-do society. We have to continue to fight the negativity and the pessimism and people that saying we can't do things. And it's especially true of 2020 when we're facing a pandemic as we are, that's been, as I said, very detrimental to so many people's lives. We need to remain positive, optimistic, and we need to remain a can-do society. That's the American spirit. That has made America a leader for many years and will continue to ensure that we have a place in leadership in the world. We need to continue to be a can-do society. So if it's the right thing to do, let's get it done and let's do it. Just like we can fight this pandemic and get past it and protect as many people as possible.
Okay, and on that note, we are actually not just out of time, but slightly over time. And so I thank you both for joining us this evening for our weekly Asian American Herald show. I'm Hamani Gupta Carlson, and my guests have been Clifton Park Town Supervisor Phil Barrett and New York State Board of Elections Public Information Officer John Conklin. The Asian American Herald is a Facebook-based news media outlet dedicated to discussing topics and building community among Asian Americans in the capital region of New York and well beyond. Continue to send us your story ideas and look for a recording of this show on our Facebook page. Have a good evening. Thank you both.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
You're welcome.
Thank you.